Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at one of the cheapest motherboards I think I've ever purchased and ever reviewed. And I'll be honest with you, it isn't pretty. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at MSI's B460M-A Pro. You might not like it, but keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at possibly one of the cheapest motherboards I've ever purchased. Now, obviously take that into context, inflation and that kind of thing, and obviously my arithmetic is not particularly good. I think the cheapest one we ever bought was about £20 plus postage. This one was actually £28 from CCL here in the United Kingdom. There was a deal that was posted on our Discord channel, and in the deal section, I think it was Mr. McKnight which actually posted it, so we have him to blame for this particular predicament. It isn't all bad. We managed to get a Intel 10105F processor and a motherboard and some change out of £100, which at the moment, late December 2021, if you're watching this in hindsight, it isn't a good time for buying budget components. It really, really isn't. Now, it's a shame that this isn't the non-F version with graphics built in. I think that would have possibly sweetened the deal a little bit, although we would be paying additionally about another £30, £35 to go for the non-F model. Which then kind of, yeah, is it worth it, is it not? We could possibly get another graphics card a little bit cheaper, so anyway, I'm digressing entirely. Let's take a look at this absolutely awful motherboard. Now, as you can see, this comes in a black box with the MSI logo on, which is actually the old version of the MSI logo, so that gives you some idea of how old this is. On the front of the box, there is just a generic sticker on there saying what the board is, and this is a D-grade product, which basically means it comes with absolutely nothing. In fact, actually, it did say on the website that it didn't come in a box, so they've managed to kind of dig this out of somewhere. So praise for small mercies. Let's take a look at the board itself. So again, this is the Intel chipset. This is the B460 chipset, and it's suitable for 10th gen Intel processors and Intel 10th gen processors only. Now, this is going to support processors from the humble Celeron G5900. Let's just get rid of that box. All the way up to, well, technically it says it supports the i9-10900. I personally wouldn't recommend using that on this particular board for obvious reasons, because it's, well, an extremely cheap board, no overclocking as such, and a pretty weak VRM setup. So let's take a look at it. As you can see, this is literally all we get in the box. The board is a completely bare board. Now, I should actually say, for those of you that are possibly looking at this video and maybe you've searched for the MSI B460M Pro, this is the B460M-A Pro. Now, both of them are actually kind of listed together on MSI's website. There is a few small differences between the two. In fact, the -A is kind of like the cut down version of it. So the standard Pro version has 4 RAM slots rather than the 2, as you see on here. It also has a beefier heatsink setup across all of the VRM, and also it does support things like wireless, Wi-Fi, etc, etc, and I believe it's got Bluetooth as well. I'm not entirely sure on that, but it's definitely got Wi-Fi. Basically, it's a better board, but the -A is a cut down version, essentially designed for businesses and kind of office PCs where you don't really need all the bells and whistles. As long as you've got a couple of USB ports and you can get an output on it, then it's absolutely fine. So this is, as you, well, you can probably see already, this is an extremely limited board. So let's go through some of the specifications. I've actually made some notes here of some of the details, because obviously I don't have a box to read off, which is actually pretty poor seeing this is an unboxing channel. But anyway, for £28, I'm sure we can overlook that. So starting off with the board itself, as you can see, this is a micro ATX board, which you can probably guess from the part number. So it's a B460M, and the M obviously denotes that it is a micro ATX board. Again, this is for 10th gen Intel processors based on the Intel B460 chipset. So with that, there are some limitations now, some of which are going to be RAM frequencies. So we have got 2 RAM slots here, so we can use up to 64 gigabytes of RAM with 2 32 gig sticks, which is unlikely to happen, but potentially you might want to. You are going to be limited RAM speed wise if you're using a i9 or i7, which, why would you? But you can actually use RAM up to 2933 megahertz in XMP mode. If you're using an i5 or lower, then you're going to be limited to a maximum of DDR4 2666. Yeah, not brilliant, and that is with XMP enabled. There is also on this board the OC Genie, which is built into the MSI BIOS, which will kind of unlock some of the power limitations very, very slightly on some K series processors, but for most people, basically, there is no overclocking. So if you're looking at buying this and overclocking your processor, look elsewhere. This really isn't going to do what you need it to. Some of that is given away by, obviously, the amount of power we can actually get into the board. So we have actually got an 8-pin EPS connector on here. Intel processors are a little bit more power hungry on that 14 nanometer process that they use for these CPUs on the 10th gen. You can see on the side we've got our VRM setup. So as you can see, there's 5 chokes and 5 sets of VRM, so input and output, all that kind of stuff. I'll try and give you some close-ups of that so you can see what exactly is on there, and basically my eyes cannot see it. Would have been nice to have seen some heat sinks on there, but again, we can't really do any overclocking. This is probably aimed towards somewhere between the Celeron and i5 range, so whether or not you actually need additional cooling, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Anyway, moving across, so moving to this section here, we've got the CPU fan header. So you've got a single PWM fan header, and next to that is a chassis fan header. That is all of the chassis fan headers on this motherboard, so I don't have to go looking around for other ones on the board anywhere, and you don't have to worry about where you're going to wire your cables to, because literally it's there. That is it. Now they do support obviously all the cool features that are in the MSI sensor software, or if you want to go old school, the MSI Dragon sensor. So you can take control of the fans in there. They've got the PWM mode, you've got the voltage DC mode, and you've got the auto mode, all that kind of good stuff. I really like MSI's sensor. I think it's a very good piece of software for controlling fans, all that kind of good stuff. Something that we can't do in the MSI sensor on this particular board though is take control of RGB, or at least none of the onboard RGB. Now that is another thing which has been taken away from this board between the Dash A and the standard Pro version. The Pro version supports both 12 volt RGB and 5 volt addressable RGB. On this particular board, as you can possibly work out, and I'll give you some close-ups of this, the actual headers for that have actually been kind of taken away, or the pins removed. So you don't have any RGB on this board whatsoever. There is a little bit of light on the side there. There's a little bit of lights up when the board is powered up, just so you kind of basically know it's on. And we do also have some diagnostic D-LEDs up the top here, which is a really, really nice thing to see, especially on a cheaper motherboard. So the diagnostic LEDs, you've got CPU, then you've got RAM, then you've got VGA, and then you've got boot. So if for some reason the system's not posting, you're not getting a display on your screen, you can refer to the diagnostic LEDs and see exactly what is going on. Now obviously, because this is a B460 chipset, it only supports 10th gen Intel processors. So really we're not going to have a problem of not having a correct BIOS for the processor we're using, because basically every chip that was released on the 10th gen was actually included in the primary BIOS. You can get BIOS updates for this board, and in fact the latest one does give you a BIOS so you can directly install Windows 11. Obviously you're going to need to get the system up and running first to flash that BIOS before you start installing it. There isn't any USB flashback on this whatsoever, so yeah, that is another one of those trade-offs of being a slightly cheaper board. So moving down slightly, we've got our 24-pin power connector there in the usual place, followed by our USB front panel header, so you can plug that in there. Next up, we've got a couple of SATA ports, and underneath that again there are another 4, so you've got 6 SATA ports in total. Moving across, we'll quickly go across because this is relevant. We have got an M.2 slot. Now the M.2 slot supports both SATA based drives and NVMe based drives, both of which will be directly connected to the CPU itself. If you're using an M.2 SSD or a SATA based M.2 drive in this slot, then you will lose the ability to use SATA port number 2 for the typical SATA drives. That is one of the kind of downsides. Other than that, all the rest of the chipset is absolutely fine and everything is completely wired. Speaking of wired, we've also got a PCI Express Gen 3 x 16 slot here with the armor plating around there. So this can be fine for pretty much most graphics cards. Again, budget board, you're not likely to be putting a PCI Express Gen 4 card in here, even if you could possibly buy one. So most people are going to stick with maybe an older card, GTX 1060, 1070, 1080s, possibly 2060s, that kind of thing I would imagine. But again, let me know in the comment section what you've got on your board if you've got one of these. So moving down even further, we've got the CMOS battery. So again, if you're wanting to reset your CMOS, if you've dialed in some incorrect settings, which is probably unlikely because there's not really a lot of settings you can change on here. But if you do, then you can just flip the battery out and that will reset the settings, etc. Underneath the SATA ports there is a tiny little 2-pin connector there, and that is your CMOS reset, or kind of jumper for resetting the CMOS. and then we can go down to the connectivity at the bottom. So again, there isn't a great deal. We've exhausted all the fan headers already, so there's going to be no more of those. But we have got our front panel I/O in this bottom section here, and then next to that you've got a COM port, which is kind of pointless, but it's there anyway. Then you've got some dip switches, JFP2. Now that is basically your kind of audio, so you can choose to use either the middle 2 pins for a buzzer or the outer 2 pins for a speaker, again, depending on which you want to do. Next to that, you've got the JTMP slot, so you can add a TMP header or TMP module onto this header here. So again, for Windows 11, you may want to do that, again, down to the individual. Next to that, we've got a USB 2.0 header, again, a capacitor, and then another USB 2.0 header next to that. Next one is JC1, so that is the chassis intrusion, or JCI1 I believe it is, so that is your chassis intrusion connection. Obviously next to that you've got the 2 ports there, which normally on the Pro board would be your addressable RGB and your RGB, but yeah, we don't have those on this particular board. And in the corner we've got our traditional location for your front panel header for your front panel audio. This is using the Realtek ALC 892 and 897 codecs, using some reasonably good Nichicon capacitors on there, so audio isn't great, but it'll get the job done. It is supporting 7.1 surround audio, although on the back we've only got 3 ports, so if you do want to take advantage of 7.1 audio via those 3.5mm jacks, you are going to have to wire in your front panel header and the ones at the rear at the same time to get that surround sound, so do bear that in mind, although realistically, I don't think anybody does that these days, but hey, you never know. Other things of interest, so you've got PCI Express Gen 2 x1 ports, got 2 of those, and then obviously you've got your heatsink over the actual B460 chipset itself. Push pins holding that in, so if you want to at some point take that off and repaste it, you certainly can do pretty easily without getting a screwdriver and all that kind of stuff out. And I think that's it pretty much for the board. Obviously centrally you've got the actual socket itself, so it's LGA 1200 on the typical setup here, so you've got the plastic lever and you've got the pins on there. I haven't actually checked to see if any of them are damaged or bent. They don't appear to be used in any way, so hopefully it should be absolutely fine, but we will be doing some installations and some testing with our new processor over there in a little budget system which we're going to build up, so if you want to see how that goes, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the channel icon and you'll be notified of future video releases. So that's it for the board itself. I don't think there's anything else we really need to cover on here. I think we've probably laboured it on way too long already. So let's take a look at the I/O on the back. So the I/O isn't particularly great. There's not a great deal going on here. So we've got 2 USB 2.0 ports there, and underneath that we've got a combo keyboard and mouse port, PS2 style. So for older businesses, that might actually be beneficial. Potentially you might find a use for that. Next to that, you've got a DVI-D port, so that's going to support 1920 by 1200 at 60 Hertz. Next to that, there is the HDMI port, so that's going to be supporting HDMI 1.4. So we're not going to get a great deal out of that. Again, we're probably looking maximum of 4096 by 2016 at 30 Hertz. So possibly okay for some playback for media, so in a media center box. 4K, 30 frames per second, going to be fine. Most movies are 24, 25 frames per second, so yeah, get a nice bit of motion blur. Gaming wise on inbuilt graphics, yeah, not so much, not probably a great thing. Although Intel integrated graphics are pretty pony anyway, so yeah, you're most likely going to be using a graphics card, or at least I hope you're going to be using a graphics card for this, unless you're just using it in a business environment, in which case it's absolutely fine. So moving across, we've got 2 sets of 2, so 4 in total of our USB 3.2 Gen 1, so that's 5 gigabit per second ports. We've got a gigabit LAN, so that is Realtek 8111H. Absolutely fine, no problems. There's obviously gigabit 10100 as well, so you can choose either. There's also software as well to do LAN management, all that kind of stuff in the MSI Center, should you wish to. And then lastly, we've got our 3 audio ports, so color-coded ports there, so the green one being ear, pink being the microphone, and blue being the line. Of course, with the Realtek software, you can go in and configure those and change them however you see fit. On the back of the board, nothing of interest at all, just the back of the actual socket mechanism itself, and yeah, very, very little else apart from lots of tracks to stab my fingers with whilst I'm trying to do an unboxing. So I think that's going to be pretty much it. Obviously, the only other things we've not really looked into much detail is, obviously, the M.2 slot. There is this kind of freezer port on here, which you can take off and put your drive in underneath there. That's going to support drives of up to 2280 in size. In terms of actually capacity, obviously, the choice is entirely up to you. You can, like I said, you can use both M.2 SATA and M.2 NVMe, which are both going to be directly wired to the CPU and taking control of there. So yeah, overall, it pretty much ticks all the boxes that you'd need to actually get a system up and running. And there's no reason why you couldn't make a half-decent gaming machine out of it. Obviously, do temper your expectations. You're going to be limited on what you can choose in terms of overclocking options, because basically there's kind of none apart from XMP for your RAM. But for a bargain basement system, this motherboard and processor for £100, if you're looking at going down the AMD route at the moment, literally the processor is going to cost you £100 if you can actually buy one. Motherboards, AMD boards are generally quite cheap. Brand new ones, you're looking somewhere around about £40 mark. If you were to buy this brand new in the box, untouched, with all the accessories, etc., I think you'd be looking and paying in around about £55 here in the UK. So to get it for £28 with no accessories, which realistically, what accessories do you need other than maybe some SATA cables? The IO shield is going to be a little bit of a stumbling block. We don't have an IO shield on this. Normally you would have one included in there, just a traditional stainless steel one. So we have actually got some 3D printed ones, which we'll be trying out and trying to match up. So if you want to see how that goes, we will be doing a live build using this particular motherboard, this processor, and some other cheaper alternatives to try and build ourselves an ultra budget gaming PC. But again, if you want to see how that goes, then hit the subscribe button and the chime icon, and you'll be notified of future video releases. So that's going to wrap this one up. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I've got to be honest with you, this is an Intel board. I know there's going to be virtually no interest in it whatsoever, so I'm not expecting a ton of replies or a ton of views, to be completely honest with you, but it's something I picked up cheap, and I think for £100, it's actually not a bad little combo. But anyway, like I said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.